I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting me along today on this very important, at this very important conference. And I want to talk to you today about something a little bit different. I want to talk to you about Islamist extremism. Islamist, wow, the first person to use the word Islamism. That's fascinating. President Obama made a speech a few months ago where he said there's an evil ideology at play. But what he forgot to do was to name that evil ideology. And what that allows is polarization, and it allows other people to define what that ideology is. It allows the far right to define that Muslims are all extremists. And it allows the far left to decide that they want to try and work with people who they consider to be the people that are being oppressed. For me, and for the majority of the experts that have been working in this field for a long time, we must name the word. We must say what it is that we are opposed to. And just as there is a difference between social and socialism, social is the way that we all interact. Socialism is a distinct political ideology that is left of center. Islam is a faith that nearly 2 billion people around the world practice in many different ways. Islamism is a distinct political ideology that wants two things. One is to set up a utopian Islamist caliphate and impose their version of Sharia. That's very important. And the second thing they want to do is to spread that flag and that version and impose that version of Sharia all the way around the world. So when we're deciding and when we're looking at what it is we're challenging, we have to not suffer from the Voldemort effect. You know, he who shall not be named. We must name the problem that we're actually taking on and challenging. I thought I'd start the main body of the presentation really with a personal story on how I, as a Muslim, got involved in this particular area of work. My parents went to the UK in the early 1950s. I was born in 65. And when I was younger, growing up in the UK, there was no such thing as faith-based identity politics. Nobody measured me or classified me by my faith. And the school I went to, we were only 5% Asian background. If they liked me, they would call me Asian. If they didn't like me, they'd call me a Paki. Nobody defined me, and classified me by my faith. Faith-based identity politics is something that really is taking force now. And I've heard a couple of speeches today about focusing just on the faith side. And I'll come on to that in a minute. I got on with my life. When I was younger, I was a punk rocker at the age of 14. Then when I was 19, I joined CND and wanted to ban the bomb. And then I grew up and started working and then sort of changed my views a little bit. But about 11 years ago, and I was happy in the corporate sector. I was on the board of one of the largest American companies at that time in the digital arena. My youngest daughter, she was 7 at the time, came home one day and she said, "Daddy, I don't want to be a Muslim." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because Muslims are always angry and they're always killing people." And I said, "Show me, where are you getting these messages from?" So she showed me her emails, she showed me all the things she was being bombarded with. She turned on a television screen and there were some guys who happened to be the Taliban. They looked very angry and they looked as if they wanted to kill people. They were burning effigies of George Bush and Tony Blair. And this started a process of self-reflection for me. Because here was a young girl, 7 years of age. She didn't know anything about Islam, the faith, really, other than the fact that she saw mummy and daddy fasting during Ramadan, and now and then when they felt like it, doing their daily obligations, the prayers, the salah. She didn't know anything about geopolitics. She just knew she didn't want to be angry. And the message she was getting from all over the place, that is, if you want to be a Muslim, you have to be angry, and she didn't want to be. So I got a backpack and I traveled around the world, and I ended up in some very strange places and ended up finding Sufism again, or refinding Sufism, having rejected it at a young age, and came back to the UK with a clear view that the faith my parents brought to the UK, where there's no distinction, there's no dichotomy between being, for me, British and Muslim, and for them, Pakistani and Muslim, is the faith that the overall majority of Muslims around the world happen to practice. But there is something going on. So I left my job and I set up an organization, one to pay the bills, another one to do a lot of research. And I was on the government task force after 7/7, the bombings, and I ended up being an advisor to Tony Blair, to Ruth Kelly, Hazel Blears, David Cameron, Michael, a whole range of politicians. And I joined Quilliam about 1.5 years ago. Initially, I joined just as a consultant and then ended up becoming the managing director. I didn't want the job, by the way. I didn't want to do it, but I ended up sort of being asked to do it. Quilliam is an organisation that's been set up by former extremists. Our chairman has spent 4 years out of a 5-year sentence in Egypt for trying to instigate a military coup for an Islamist organisation, Hizb ut-Tahrir. Our president, Noman bin Notman, used to be one of Osama bin Laden's lieutenants in North Africa. He set up the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group and spent time in prison in Libya until he disavowed the ideology and theology. And we have a number of other people. So it's been set up by former Islamist extremists to try and counter extremism now, and in particular Islamist extremism. But we do realise there is a symbiotic relation between the far right and Islamism. So we do touch on that as well. And one of the things we were able to do about 1.5 years, 2 years ago was to facilitate the leaving of Tommy Robinson from the largest street fighting far right group in the UK, the EDL. I'm not saying he's been de-radicalised, I'm not saying he's still not a bigot, but we were able to decapitate the head, if you like, and so rather than having thousands of people at marches now, they struggle to get 100 people. So what is it that we're actually fighting? And what is it that we're actually challenging? Well, we've had the Norwegian action plan that I was consulted with, and I'm going to draw a diagram here for you because there are 2 parts to the prevent strategy, the CVE strategy, and the action plan. And when we were writing the action plan and when we were doing things like, how can we actually, if somebody came, somebody was in a bar or somebody in an elevator, how can you describe it very, very quickly? You know, what's it all about? Well, if we take the attitudes of Muslims, Norway, Europe, it could be anywhere, at any given time, X% of Muslims will directly support ISIL, AQ, Boko Haram, etc., etc. Some people talk about Al-Qaeda-inspired extremism, and some people talk about ISIL-inspired extremism. Well, the reality is, Al-Qaeda and ISIL did not inspire extremism. Extremism inspired them. And if we don't get that right, in 5 years' time or in 10 years' time, we'll be using another acronym. We must remember that. 10 years ago, I remember writing this strategy for the government in the UK, and they wanted to put Al-Qaeda-inspired extremism in, just to be politically correct. Well, now nobody talks about it. They're the good guys now, apparently, according to some. General Petraeus wants to work with them now to try and defeat ISIL. But at any given time, there is X%, and that changes. At the same time, there is Y% that sympathize. What is sympathy? Well, you have them here in Norway. We have them in the UK. We have them everywhere. People who will turn around and say, do you know what? In an ideal Islamic state, if somebody goes through due process of Sharia, if they change their faith, they should be killed. In an ideal Islamic state, if somebody goes through due process of Sharia, if they commit adultery, a woman should be stoned to death. But you know what? Not in Norway. Not in the UK. What is the difference between them and the people who are actually doing it in Iraq and Syria? The only difference really is, one is doing it, one would like to do it. But there are people who do support. And then at the same time, there is Z% of people that have empathy. And you'll come across these people. And these people will turn around to you and say, you know what? I don't support ISIL, because that's the word these days. I don't support ISIL, but I understand why they're doing it. Okay, fine. I'm still waiting for somebody to tell me what foreign policy, what the Western foreign policy has got to do with taking Yazidi sex slaves in the region. What has foreign policy got to do with killing Shia in Kuwait? What has foreign policy got to do with guys going out there and killing other Muslims who are not the same as them? I sort of can't empathize and I can't get my head around, understand why they're doing it. The time taken, and this is, I won't use my figures, I'll use Gilles de Kerkhove figures, because my figures will scare you. Gilles de Kerkhove, the head of the counterterrorism for the EU, with whom I shared a panel a couple of weeks ago in Prague, said that the shortest time he has observed somebody who the authorities and agencies have been monitoring in the West, in Europe, has been in that space, and then them having to be arrested because they're about to commit an act of terrorism. Not my words, Gilles de Kerchove. 2 weeks. The shortest period, according to Gilles de Kerchove. I keep saying his name because I don't want to be taken out of context. My figure would scare you. I'm not going to use my figure. I'm not allowed to because I've worked with some agencies on that. There is a guy in the UK called Ziamani. 2 months ago, he was sentenced to 20 years. What was he going to do? He was on his way with a bag to decapitate an off-duty British soldier. 3.5 months before he was arrested, he was a Christian. And this is a story you're going to come across more and more. But he was an Islamist extremist. He joined and converted. This is what we call the sharp end of the prevent strategy, CVE strategy, action plan, whatever you want to call it. In here, when people have been identified, there needs to be a direct intervention. Worst case scenario, if the danger is clear and present, you arrest them. We have to protect the society. If they haven't committed a crime, go through some form of de-radicalisation program. In the UK, we have something called the Channel program. And since its inception, in 2008, there have been 6,000 people that have been referred to the Channel program just in the UK. And right now, the rate at which it's running right now is nearly 100 every week. And there are mentors who help bring these people back to here. Not to here, to here. One of the strategies that's been used in the past, and is being used in the US right now, and it's not going to work, is to take people who are in this space and try and get them to bring these people back. The problem is, these people will only ever bring them back to here. And if we look at that, we've still got a problem. And the third thing is for the people that aren't meeting the threshold, rehabilitate. That's the sharp end. We do some of that. We've dealt with some of the most hardest cases within prisons in the UK and some of the not so hard cases as well. But I just want to say a little anecdote. And this is something where we can be in danger of putting too much emphasis on using just faith and religion on its own as a cure. I went to a prison which shall remain nameless, and I took an imam, a leading imam in the UK, who got an award by the Queen for the work that he did working with me. And I took him in with me, and I did the political stuff, and I asked him to do the religious stuff. It was great. And the warden said, there's a guy we've got a problem with. Can you have a word with him? So I said to the imam, you go. You're going to have a word with him. He came out. About half an hour later, his face was pale. And I made a joke, and I said, have you de-radicalised him? And he went like this. And I leant over and I said, what's the matter? And he turned round to me and said, he's got a point. The imam went in with his theology. The guy said, I'll see your theology with my theology. The guy said, I'll see you with my version. He said, I'll see you with my version. The imam won the theological argument, perhaps, but then he hit him with the intellectual, the ideological, the social, and the emotional, and the imam had nothing. So when we're looking at how we can combat this, we must remember that faith is only one small part, and if we put all of our eggs in one basket, it's not going to work. I'll tell you. Now, it's not going to work. I've been doing this for 11 years. It doesn't work on its own. Because the people who have become extremists don't recognize the imams that we want to actually promote and get the voices of. They're kafir as far as they're concerned. So, that's the sharp end. What we really must do is try and shift that graph as much as we can to the left and build the resilience amongst our youngsters and everybody else so that when they have this indoctrination, when they have these charismatic recruiters who will try and recruit them, they can push back. So that's deconstructing the narrative, but also promoting what it is we stand for. What are our values? David Cameron said British values, fine, okay, let him use that term. But I'd rather use the values of a liberal secular democracy. That's what we believe in. So we have to instill these values into youngsters, not as Muslims, but as citizens from a young age. That is the action plan. That is prevent. That's the sharp end. This is the soft end. This has to be done by civil society. Cannot be done by the government. Government tries to do it, again, it won't work. We tried it in the UK, it didn't work. So now there's a different approach. So what are the pathways to Islamist terrorism or Islamist extremism? Each person's journey is unique and bespoke, but there are some common patterns. And I wasn't going to talk about this, but I think I will now. If we split it up into three, and in the middle, let's put in the lens, the framework. And in here we have the intellectual, the ideological, the social, the emotional, and the spiritual. We have charismatic recruiters. We have online and offline. And by the way, I just want to make a point here. I did an interview this morning with the BBC before I came on here, and the journalist said to me, but everybody's telling me all the radicalisation is happening online. You know, it's not parents' responsibility, it's not anybody else's responsibility, it's the internet. Well, the reality is, and we've done a long piece of research called Jihad Trending, it's on our website. We monitor jihadi websites for over a period of 12 to 18 months. An individual does not go online to buy a handbag or a pair of shoes and end up coming out of the internet as a jihadist. They have to be looking for something, or someone has to find them. And let's put that lens in here. Let's put the charismatic recruiters in here. Let's put all the narratives and the social conditions, etc., everything in this lens. Okay. On the left of the lens, I'm going to draw you three boxes. In here, the first one is genuine grievance. What's a genuine grievance? 43% of all the convicted Islamist terrorists in the UK have a university education. More than half of the people that are convicted Islamists in the UK were integrated into the society, had good jobs. The leadership of Hizb ut-Tahrir in the UK are all full of doctors, psychiatrists, whole range. Zawahiri, the head of Al-Qaeda, is a doctor. Osama bin Laden, if I'm not mistaken, was an engineer. Well, certainly an entrepreneur, had lots of money. But a genuine grievance very often has got nothing to do with just disenfranchisement at the earliest stage. Sadiq Khan, who was the lead bomber, the 7/7 bombing in London, whose family I know, I've interviewed, I know them very well now, he had a genuine grievance. He went to university, he met a girlfriend, had a girlfriend at university. He went out with her for 3 years. When he came out of university, he wanted to marry her. The father said, no, you're Pakistani, you have to marry your cousin from Pakistan. That was his genuine grievance. And he was looking for an answer and a solution for that. And that led him... Sorry, is that music saying I have to stop? No? Okay. I can stop if you want me to. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. And that led him into the hands of certain recruiters. And in here we have push factors and pull factors. Next, partial grievances. What's the partial grievance? Foreign policy. Well, I mentioned foreign policy before. A grievance that is based on a partial truth. 1 million people marched against the Iraq war. I was one of them. Why are there not 1 million jihadists if foreign policy was the issue? Because not all of them have got into the hands of these people. And the final one is a perceived grievance. What's a perceived grievance? A person that we, inverted commas, de-radicalised, whatever that is, actually taking them back to the left of the curve, was a senior recruiter for an Islamist organisation. And he tells a story where he was on a train one day. And he saw a young woman. She was wearing the hijab. So he identified her as being Muslim. She had a young child with her. She was reading the newspaper, and the front page of the newspaper was a story about somebody famous who was committing acts of paedophilia. Acts against children. So he quickly realized that this young woman, this young mother, must be concerned about her child because she's just reading the story, and he engaged in a conversation with her. Never met her before. And got her to a point to say to her, you know what? The West is so immoral. It's bankrupt. It's corrupt. You're never going to get parity. You're never going to get a solution. You're never going to get protection for your children. You're never going to find solutions to racism. You're never going to get all of this unless you do one of these four things. The first one is what I call, and I call this because there was a school, my wife's a school teacher, I was asked to come in and actually work with some kids who formed what they called the Global Muslim Ummah Gang, and they went around beating up non-Muslims because they were kafir. And I went into the school and I did the critical analysis thinking with them as a favour. But I've adopted their term now. Only way through coming through this lens, and this gets bigger and bigger if we don't tackle it, is to join the Global Muslim Ummah Gang and set up a utopian Islamist caliphate somewhere in the world, and that's the only way you will be an equal and fair citizen, only way you'll have protection for your children. Yeah, that's one thing. The second thing is the theological justification. To say, you know what? The only way you can be in our gang, the only way that you can be a Muslim is to believe in this, is to do this, and guess what? If you don't do it, you're not a Muslim, and God will reward you for doing this. Every single suicide bombing that I've seen, videotape that I've seen, always says one thing in common. There's a common denominator, and that is, may Allah accept my sacrifice. They believe they're martyrs. So the theological justification. More and more now, we're seeing people with the war on terror now being 14 years old. There are people who know somebody else, who are connected to somebody else, who may have been killed by innocent people, killed by drone attacks, or got caught up in it. And there are people now, a bit like the IRA in Northern Ireland. You know, why are you doing this? A young kid was asked in the 1970s that I saw an interview, and he said, well, because he killed my uncle. So people are now looking at revenge. And the other one is solutions for mental health issues. In Norway, there was a piece of research done last year, and from that it was concluded that more than 40% of the convicted Islamist terrorists within Norway, it's not a great number, but percentage-wise, have now been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. If you look at the recruitment videos, one of the guys that killed drummer Lee Rigby, first of all, he suffered from clinical depression. He was being treated for it. If you look at the recruitment videos, they focus in on jihad, or jihadism, shall I say, the forceful, for me, this is my jihad, by the way, what I'm doing right now. It's my struggle. But jihadism is using force to implement and impose one version of Sharia. That's what I call jihadism. So jihadism, for them, is a solution for mental health issues. This first bit is social cohesion. And we should do it. It's the right thing for a society to do. If somebody feels disenfranchised, if there's racism in the society, they can't get a job, we should do that for everybody, not just Muslims. But if we focus just on this, guess what? This will get bigger and bigger and bigger, because every single person in this room, when we go home tonight in our own individual beds and we put our head on the pillow before we go to sleep, I'll bet you we all have a grievance and we're thinking about it. And my grievance to me may be nothing like yours, but to me, it's the biggest grievance in the world and the most important thing in the world. And if a charismatic recruiter can tap into that, then there's a problem. So if we just focus on this, which is what a lot of people did, forget it. Really, honestly, forget it. We should do this, though, but not for countering extremism. This is the hard end, the sharp end. I don't know if there are any people in here who are mentors for deradicalisation, or anybody from any agencies in here, or police, or whatever. This is for them. This, the battle of ideas, promoting what it is we believe in, deconstructing the narrative, safeguarding our children, all of these things are what every single person in this room should be doing, is civil society, take it away from religion, and make Islamism, the political ideology, just as unfashionable, just as unpopular as we make racism or fascism. And I'm going to end there, because Mustafa is telling me my time's run out. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope that was useful.